board is now back in session. The time is 8:37. There are no actions coming out of our executive session, so we will move back into item 10A, which is conduct a hearing and consider the Level 3 appeal of the Reconsideration Committee's decision related to the 2015 Hunting Mifflin Harcourt Texas Biology textbook and the 2014 McGraw-Hill Aquatic Science textbook. Dr. Knoll.
All right, thank you very much. Item 10A is an appeal brought pursuant to Board Policies EFA Instructional Resources, Instructional Materials, and GF Public Complaints. The complainant, Dr. Alex Harris, a community member. Dr. Harris is appealing the decisions of two reconsideration committees that considered reconsideration requests Dr. Harris filed relating to portions of two high school science textbooks, the 2014 McGraw-Hill Aquatic Science textbook and the 2015 Houghton Mifflin Harcourt Texas Biology textbook. For the record, the following board members are present: Mrs. Dungan, Mrs. Wagaman, Mr. Hubert, Mrs. Nelson, Mr. Williams, and Mrs. Odenwiller. Mrs. Chase has excused herself from the meeting at this point. The board, Dr. Harris, and the administration's representative, Dr. Chris Hines, have received exhibits 1 through 17. These documents will be part of the record of this hearing. The district received 3 instructional materials reconsideration requests from Dr. Harris, one dated February 13th, one February 21st, and finally one on February 29th of this past school year. The 3 reconsideration requests pertain to portions of 2 high school science textbooks. 2 of the reconsideration requests relate to the 2015 Houghton Mifflin Harcourt Texas Biology book, and 1 reconsideration request relates to the 2014 McGraw-Hill Aquatic Science textbook. In his request for reconsideration, Dr. Harris asked the district to, and I quote, supplement both the aquatic science and the biology textbooks by teaching faith and beliefs of creationism on the origin of life as an alternative hypothesis in a parallel class with equal class time, allowing the students with the guidance of their parents to choose either the atheism or creationism class on the origin of life for biology and the origin of the universe for aquatic science. Second point, and I quote, include in the biology curriculum for life the faith and beliefs on life without racism from the major religions of today: Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Confucianism. If the current curriculum on evolution, which is based on the religion of atheism, is retained, its racist history must be exposed. In accordance with local board policy EFA, the district appointed reconsideration committees to review the portions of each textbook to which Dr. Harris objects and to determine if the objected to material meets the board's selection criteria for instructional materials as outlined in policy EFA. The district combined the 2 reconsideration requests pertaining to the 2015 Texas Biology textbook and appointed 1 committee to address both reconsideration requests relating to this textbook. The reconsideration committee denied Dr. Harris's request and determined that board policy 𝐬𝐴C legal, basic instructional program, required instruction secondary, requires the district to teach the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, commonly referred to as the TEKS. The information to which Dr. Harris objects is part of the science TEKS, which, like all TEKS, are adopted by the State Board of Education after they receive input from educators and other stakeholders, including parents and community members, and outline the state standards for what students are to learn in each course and grade. Accordingly, the committee determined that they did not have the authority to modify the district's biology curriculum to include items that were not included in the state-adopted TEKS as Dr. Harris has requested. The reconsideration committee for the 2014 Aquatic Science textbook determined that the material in which Dr. Harris objects was not material that is taught in district classrooms because the material is not included in the TEKS for aquatic science. As a result, the committee did not grant the relief Dr. Harris requested. Dr. Harris appealed the decisions of both committees. The basis for his appeal of the biology textbook is, quote, origin of life can only be explained logically by religion, and the text presents scientific hypothesis which can never be proven, and our faith and hope of the religion of atheism. Also, the RC is unaware of the racism behind the Darwin's evolution theory. The basis for Dr. Harris' appeal of the Reconsideration Committee's decision related to the aquatic science textbook is, quote, Conroe ISD High School Aquatic Science Textbook in Chapter 5.1, Beginnings, pages 117 to 119, teaches the Big Bang Theory, which is called out in the high school science teaks in the following sections. Section 112.33 Astronomy, 112.36 Earth, Space, Science, and 112.48 Astronomy. Dr. Harris's appeals were combined as allowed by Board Policy GF Local Public Complaints. Dr. Chris Hines served as a Level 2 hearing officer for the appeal. Dr. Hines upheld the decisions of both reconsiderations committees. Dr. Harris then appealed to the Board of Trustees. The issue before the Board of Trustees is to determine if both textbooks meet the selection criteria set out in Board Policy EFA. The Board must base its decision on Board Policy, the evidence contained in the exhibits, and the statements made by the parties. Members of the Board, please indicate by raising your hand if you have reviewed the record in its entirety. Let the record show that all members have raised their hand. I will now ask each member of the Board whether he or she is able to serve as an impartial member of the Board in the reconsideration of Dr. Harris's appeal. Any member not able to serve in such a manner may say so and ask to be excused. Mrs. Dungan?
I would
Yes.
like to be excused.
Be excused? Okay. Mrs. Weigeman?
I am able.
Okay. Mr. Hubert?
I'm able.
Mrs. Nelson?
I'm able.
Mr. Williams?
I'm able.
Mrs. Odenweller?
I'm sorry, it was too far back. I'm also going to be excused on it.
Okay. Because Dr. Harris brought the appeal, he will present his argument first, followed by Dr. Hines. Each party will have 20 minutes to make their presentation. This is not an evidentiary hearing, and there will be no cross-examination of witnesses, and neither party can reserve time. Are you going to have time on the screen? Okay. We will have our time on our screens around the room. I would remind both parties that all comments must be made from the podium as this hearing is being recorded. Do we have any questions from either Dr. Harris or Dr. Hines before we get started? Okay. Dr. Harris, you'll have 20 minutes to make your presentation, and you may proceed to the podium.
Thank you, Board, for giving me this time. And I want to assure you that I'm not a Christian nationalist. I'm not sure what that means, and Paul will help me understand what that is. I'm just a disciple of Jesus Christ. Dr. Hines, in his Level 2 decision denial letter dated May 18th, said, Texas Education Code requires that Texas public schools teach science. So the question today is, are you teaching science, or are you teaching the faith and beliefs of the religions based on atheism? I spent about 90 minutes with Dr. Hines at the Level 2 hearing, showing with evidence in detail that CISD was indeed teaching the faith and beliefs of the religions of atheism. And when he never denied or refuted what he said, and even in his denial letter, there's not one line that says, hey, what you said was wrong. Rather, his denial letter had excuses. Oh, the SPOE did this, or the teaks, the trustees, bought into this. Our community elected you to do what is right for our children. We want you to protect them from any form of indoctrination. So I'm sorry, if that's going to be your excuse at the end of the day, I'm really disappointed. Because ultimately, it's not about excuses. It's about protecting our children. There are two areas of concern that I'm concerned being taught at CISD under the guise of science in a cosmology and biology book. I know there's a little bit of confusion on the books, but the content is there. It's in different places. And it's all documented in the documents I shared with you. The two areas are the origin of the universe, and the second is the origin of life. and its subsequent evolution by natural selection, which is the science of racism. And I will explain what that is. So let me start with the origin of the universe. In our 8th grade STEM Scopes textbook, on page 99, I have the quote in the materials you received. The Big Bang Theory is the most widely accepted theory to explain the origin of the universe. According to this theory, the universe began as a single tiny point smaller than an atom. Can you imagine this, all of this? Smaller than an atom. And it had so much matter and energy that it exploded into this universe. Now, the question is this science? Can any of you show me the science behind it? Can Dr. Hines show me the science behind it? Anybody. Take anyone in this world. Can they show me that? Is that science or is that faith? Because I know God is infinite. He has infinite energy. And that's my faith. But when you say there's a point that appeared out of nowhere and then exploded and created this universe, that's not science. That violates real science, which is the first law of thermodynamics, which says, hey, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So if you want real science, there's real science for you. And all of a sudden to say, where did this infinite energy point come from? And we teach that in our school textbooks to our children, 8th graders, whose prefrontal cortex is not fully formed. So to me, if you say that's science, that's a lie. And you're teaching a lie to our students. Then from there, of course, when you start telling a lie, it goes to another lie. And that goes on to the origin of life by the abiotic process. Now, 𝐚𝐽𝐸 in his book, he says, hey, the origin of life is a puzzle. Meaning what? He doesn't know. And he lists a whole set of hypotheses, which are theories, which are guesses, and none of these, I will, have created life. And there are paradoxes in that theories. They contradict each other. There are contradictions. It shows that it's impossible. And one of the paradoxes is our genes are the instruction manual for our body. Hidden inside almost every cell in your body is a chemical called DNA. DNA is a short form sequence section of, gene is a short, pardon me, I don't read as well as you. Gene is a short section of DNA. Our genes contain instructions that tell our cells to make molecules called proteins. Proteins perform various functions in our bodies to keep us healthy, and so on. Now, to create proteins are required to assemble RNA DNA. But proteins are needed to make genes. But genes are found within the RNA DNA. You've got a contradiction. You can't do it. But yet we say, remember the chicken and the egg we used to joke around with, which came first? It's like that. And you know, the atheists are so desperate because they need that first cell. Because then they can kickstart the next level, which they're very comfortable with. You know, Richard Dawkins, who's an apostle of the apostle of atheism, you know, you asked, hey, how did it all begin? You know what he said? He says, well, he thinks aliens came and seeded this life, this first cell on this earth. And it's amusing to me, a man can believe in aliens coming and dropping the first self-sustaining, self-replicating cell on earth, but he can't believe in God. We'll come to that more. So to me, if you call this science, with these two critical lies, origin of the universe, origin of life, they move on. This is an area they are very comfortable with. Evolution. Now, 𝐚𝐽𝐸 in his high school biology textbooks outlined the theory of evolution based on Darwin's Origin of Species. Darwin was a Britisher, and it's very important to remember who he was. He was a Britisher, and I'll come back to this later. And he developed his theory in 1959, and then he moved on. And, you know, he he looked at the world and he said, everyone outside of the white race, they're savages. That's in his book, Descent of Man. Now let's pause for a minute and realize how blind, and I have to say stupid, Darwin was. Anyone who's racist is blind and stupid. You want to argue with me on that? Go for it. This man, a few centuries earlier, see, if you look at the world, all the affluence of the world was on the east side. India, China, people of color. And if you take Western Europe, they were savages, especially you go further west. And this man says the whole world was savages, and this is the basis of his whole theory. Voltaire made a clear statement. He's a French writer. The French were a little bit more advanced, a little bit more educated. They said, hey, you know, I'm convinced that everything that has come down to us from the banks of the Ganges, astronomy, astrology, metaphysics, and we were savages, and the Indian and Chinese people were more civilized. And so, what is interesting about Darwin's theory, and this is important, his whole thing is man and gorilla had a common ancestor. You see where this is going? And he thought that the Negro or the gorilla were of the same state. And as the evolution process went, it ended up with this supreme, superb white race. And he was so pleased that, you know, there was a check in society, because he was very concerned. He said, look, about how reproduction occurred. He said, hey, you want to raise like animals. If you want to breed dogs, you don't take a sick dog and mate it with a healthy dog. That's his analogy. He was talking about breeding. And he said, definitely, you know, with progress with time, that was his thinking. Now, the question is what triggered his racial foolishness? The world was completely agnostic to color. And I say this because William Shakespeare in the 1600s wrote Othello, a black man, a person of color, marrying a white woman. Because that would not have happened if this pervasive, offensive, disgusting philosophy existed. Now, where did this come from? And a lot of people, this is the key. And this is the key, and I have to apologize because my people, the Indian people, are the root cause for this. Because this is the caste, the color variation, and the color distinction, and the color racism all came from the caste system. I don't think too many people know that. Because how did it come about? Evidence show that the caste system, based on skin color, was developed in India around the 7th to 12th AD. But it was not very effective. And it was among a group of people called the Rajputs. The British, when they came in, the Rajputs went under their suzerainty. And with the help of the British, when they took over the Rajputs, they saw this mechanism of oppressing, how to exploit people. They were fascinated. They thought this was great. This is a clear way we could make a distinction between them and us. And also the Rajputs convinced themselves, hey, you and I are the same stock. We were separated 3,000 years back. 𝐚𝐫𝐞𝐚𝐬 has a book out on it. He said 3,000 years back, and we come back together, and they loved this. And with that, what happened is they translated that document of the caste system into English. And this was done in 1794. And he started publishing this stuff. And you can see how this whole pervaded the world society. And what is the effect of all of this? It's very sad. Supreme Court decision in 1956. You see the progression, how it goes? There was a black man who wanted to stand up for his rights, who went before the Supreme Court. You know what one of the Chief Justice, what he said? He said, you are inferior. You're unfit to associate with the white race, either social or political. And you're so far inferior, and you have no rights that the white man can respect. This is coming from our Supreme Court, mind you. And he says this, the Negro might justly and lawfully reduce to slavery for his benefit. Those are not my words. This is the Supreme Court justice. This is what we're teaching, without exposing its roots. And then it goes on to Margaret Sanger, and you know all about her and the African American Project. Oh, you know, as you go down lower in this chain, they have no control, and we want to create that perfect race. And things that they said, all these people are just step higher in brain development than a chimpanzee. And all this flows with evolution, and you can see it right out of your textbooks. Go back to the common ancestor and trace it out. That's how they taught, and this is what we teach. And then we wonder why we have so much racism in our society, because you're laying that foundation right in the schools, and that needs to change. So in conclusion, hey, I think I'm making good time. don't have a Christian agenda, because that's wrong. I cannot. I'm a Christian. When you challenge me, I'll tell you my faith. You tell me why I believe, I'll tell you why I believe. And you want to question my faith, I have no issues. But I respect our Constitution. It gives perfect religious rights. I am against any kind of deception. When you teach these teachings under the guise of science, that's deception. That is not science. And Dr. Hines, you're welcome to show me wrong. Or any of you, or you can get the best experts and prove me wrong. I would welcome it. You can't. I know you can't. These are faith. To say all of this came out of one point. A simple point. Because if you don't have a universe, you don't have the origin of life. You don't have the origin of life, you don't have evolution. It all crumbles. So we've got to get down and say, this has no foundation. This nonsense of teaching has to stop. Now, if someone wants to believe in it, I respect that. I stand back. I have no problem. Because you can classify religious thought under three categories. Very simple. Monotheism, believing in one God. Monism, which says there's one reality. And atheism. You can classify all the religious thoughts under these three categories. They're mutually exclusive. And you can teach that. And I have no problem. But don't teach it in a science class. That's deception. Teach it under social studies, which is where it belongs. The texts only call out monotheism. It doesn't even call out monism. Though you look at your textbooks, it's filled with monism and deceit and deception. Lay it out there. Lay it before the students. Tell them, hey, these are the fundamental, foundational religious schools of thought. You decide. Talk to your parents. But teach the truth. No deception. The deception has to stop. So what I'm saying is, I don't want to hear excuses. I know you don't have the capability of doing certain things, and that's what Dr. Hines said. But I expect you to stand up, and together we fight this thing to bring about the changes necessary. You cannot say, I don't have the authority, I don't have this, I don't have that, and do nothing. That is unacceptable. I expect you to stand up and say, you are right. Oh, if I'm wrong, please, feel free to tell me I am wrong. But if I'm right, I expect each and every one of you, whatever you may believe, you're a monotheist, monist, or atheist, it doesn't matter. We must present the truth. We must present it without any deceit, without any deception, so that every person can make up their mind and say, hey, okay, I choose this path. I made a very cognizant, conscious decision. But deception, I'm dead set against. And you should be too. You must be. You must be. And so this is very easily solvable. And it's a constitutional violation. To teach one deceitfully and bias, the courts are very clear. And we must fight this. So there's no excuses. Because you have been elected to teach our children. You are. So we have to hold you accountable. We have to. You can't make excuses tonight. And that's what I saw in all my denials. I love Dr. Hines. I mean, he's a friend. But sorry, your excuses don't cut it. I'm sorry. And so I believe, as we expose this, you're facing tremendous, tremendous racial problems in your schools. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Tremendous. And through education, ignorance, dispelling ignorance, that's what we need to do. So I hope you will make the right decisions. If you need any clarifications, feel free to ask me. You want to challenge what I say? I love it. Hey, truth always prevails, right? There's only one version of the truth. I may not see it perfectly, but as we strive together, we will find it. But a lie has many flavors, and we don't want a lie to our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Dr. Hines, you may now proceed. You'll have 20 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. There's several things I want to go ahead and reiterate, and Dr. Harris touched upon some of these. One, our district is required to teach the TEKS. Each year, you annually certify that we do so and that we have the materials to do so. As a K-12 Texas Public School District, we are required to teach science. The district is teaching the science TEKS in science classes. New science TEKS and instructional materials are scheduled for the 2024-25 school year. The appropriate venue to present objections to and arguments for the inclusion or exclusion of TEKS lies with the State Board of Education, not with the local school district. Dr. Harris indicated to me that he understands this when we met, and to further add evidence of this, he has presented his concerns regarding the curriculum to the State Board of Education on several occasions. Yet he chooses to, by his own admission and for his own reasons, to bring to you for your consideration an item that is not within your purview to change. If we change a TEK, it is no longer a TEK. And that is what the State Board of Education does. Conroe ISD does not add to, we do not take away from, we do not modify the state-approved TEKS. As the district is required to teach the TEKS, and modifying or removing TEKS undermines and circumvents the State Board of Education and their processes for developing the state's curriculum, selecting instructional materials to implement that curriculum. TEKS are developed through thousands of man-hours based on input from a large range of constituents that includes teachers, parents, religious leaders, and experts in the fields. The instructional materials currently in use, which were purchased in 2014, were selected from the approved list of materials adopted by the State Board of Education in accordance with board policy and are appropriately aligned and adopted. As noted in my Level 2 response, Dr. Harris's objections are based solely on the ideas expressed in the materials. Board policy EFA local states that a parent has the right to exercise control over instruction only as to his or her own child. Dr. Harris is not the parent of a child that attends a CISD school. Board policy EFA local also states that no challenged instructional material shall be removed solely because of the ideas expressed therein. and the basis for this reconsideration request are the ideas expressed in the referenced science textbooks. In summary, you do not write or rewrite the state's curriculum. The instructional materials in place were selected in accordance with board policy from the list of state-approved materials in 2014. And Dr. Harris does not get to circumvent the authority of the duly elected State Board of Education, the Texas Education Code, and local board policy, and remove materials based on his own personal beliefs. I request that you uphold the decisions of the Level 1 reconsideration committees and the Level 2 hearing officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. This time, I'll ask if any board members have any questions for either party. Okay, hearing no questions, if the board chooses, it can now discuss the matter. Because this hearing is held in open session, if during the discussion any board member should need to obtain legal advice, the board can adjourn to closed session under Texas Government Code Section 551.071, obtain legal advice from Ms. Gladys, and then return to open session to make its decision. Is there any discussion at this time?
I'd like to have that discussion with Ms.
Yes.
Gladys.
Okay. So at this time, the board will adjourn to closed session under Texas Government Code Section 551.071. The time is 9:09.
I don't know.
Are we providing feedback now or after closure?
He asked for questions.
Yeah, now we're going to go to closed session, then we can come back and do.
And you can do that if you
come back
want.
and have comments after.
Because I definitely have comments.
Okay.
Okay.
The board has now returned from its executive session. The time is 9:20. If the board chooses, it can now discuss the matter.
Dr. Harris, I just have a couple of questions. Hi. Thank you for this. I appreciate all of the work that you put into it. It's clearly something you're passionate about, and we really appreciate you taking the time to investigate. Question is, what is your desired outcome from this? Just to clarify.
Sure. My desired outcome is these teachings, which are part of the faith and belief of the religion of atheism, don't belong in a science class. Science class, we teach science. They belong under social studies. Move it to social studies, where we teach major world religion. And this is part of the major world religious schools of thought. Monotheism, monism, and atheism. They're the foundational schools of thought. Move it there and teach all these teaks. I'm not saying anything against the teaks, because they have a right, but teach it there. Because if you teach it under science, this is not science. That's a deception.
I don't know if this is a Carrie question or Dr. Hines question, but what would it look like if we moved things like the things Dr. Harris is mentioning to social studies?
So, Dr. Hines, if you were going to come up answering that.
It would be changing a teak. Essentially, we'd be moving and adding teaks into another subject. So two things on that. One is it wouldn't remove the obligation to teach it in science. And two, we would be adding teaks into another subject, which we tried to avoid simply because our teachers do not have enough time to teach the teaks they have without adding to them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
So as long as it's okay with
Because if you move it out of science, it'll reduce the load to teach that. So it'll actually reduce the load on the science teacher. But of course, in social studies, that teacher will have to have that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
No, I did have comments. I've kind of gone through this. I wanted to make sure I had an opportunity to write down all of my comments to make sure I got them all out. Because I've heard Mr. Harris multiple times in past level 3s as well as public comments. So I wrote some comments down. I wanted to make sure I got them all out. So I believe that this exercise is an egregious waste of district's time and resources. I believe Mr. Harris's logic is grossly flawed at best and is riddled with racist ideology. In this level 3, as well as in his past level 3, as well as in his ongoing public comments, I feel that Mr. Harris honestly believes that he is set apart in some sort of righteous crusade. In reality, I believe that Mr. Harris operates on a baseless, self-proclaimed doctrine. Ultimately, Mr. Harris has found the school district to be his playground or platform for attention under the pretense of protecting our kids, our children. I find that this doctrine is simply an outcry for attention, but ultimately it's the real threat to our children. That being said, I just will not entertain the charade that's being played with the back and forth arguments relative to our district and the TEACs and our Mr. Harris's religious beliefs. That's all I have.
Any other comments, board members?
Should I respond to
No, sir. It wasn't a question.
Oh, no
No.
question. Okay.
Don't have a question.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Mr. Harris, I wanted to ask, did you state that you have, before the SBOE, the same comments and questions in regards to the TEACs and the Big Bang Theory?
Yes, I have been. They've been very receptive because this whole concept of racism, the connection of how racism came into the world society, the Jim Crow laws and all of that, and that has really had a significant impact there. The unfortunate part is a lot of these TEACs were frozen some time back, and I have better things to do. I'm not trying on some, I don't, as Mr. Williams commented, and I'm not on some, wasting anybody's time. I genuinely have an interest in our children. So, but I think it comes down to this, that what are we teaching our children? Is it the truth? Now, if Mr. Williams wants to refute what I said as not the truth, I'm all ears. But it's just his own personal, I don't know what it is.
To be
Any
clear,
further-
Mr. Harris, I did not say it wasn't the truth. I just honestly believe it's your truth. I don't think it's reality.
So challenge me on what I'm saying is wrong.
I don't want to entertain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's-
that's.
Yeah. So-
Any other questions from any board members?
So, is the case still open with the State Board of Education, or have they already given you
No,
their
it
answer?
is just an ongoing thing, just like I came and presented to you, because I'm part of this community. I'm raising a concern here.
Yes.
And I'm not going to stop on this, just to be sure. I will, because you see, one of the things is our country was founded based on faith. Our founding fathers, you cannot say they were Christians, but they believed in a creator. They believed that our nation, that everyone was created equal. That's what built this nation. But where are we now? Very opposite. We rejected God in our curriculum. We rejected him out, and we say, oh, we're not equally made. That's what evolution is about.
Any further questions? Yes, Mr. Hubert?
No, just real quick, Dr. Harris, I appreciate you as well, and I think that you need to consider to continue your push with the SBOE and the Texas State Board of Education and all of those folks. My position now is of a legal position. It's not a matter of do I agree or disagree with your theory. I don't think that's the question that's been asked of any of us, is do we agree or disagree with your theory. The question that's being posed to us is, do we have the privy to change the TEACS program at our level? And that was one of the questions I wanted to ask Ms. Gladys is, if we were to do something like this, what are the ramifications? Well, there's no precedence. The ramifications could be, it could be a lack of funding. It could be a lack of being able to certify that we follow TEACS. It could be a lack of the ability to graduate kids under the State Board of Education. There's a lot of ramifications to do something like this, and I do not see that we have any legal position to make these types of changes. So I want you to understand it's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. It's a matter of is the argument that you're having, can it be solved at this level? And my understanding from our legal advice and our legal counsel and the presentation that we've gotten from Dr. Hines and the research that he's done as well is contrary to what you'd be asking.
Can I comment on you?
No, sir.
No.
I can talk to you afterwards.
No, yeah.
I
Any,
have-
yeah,
I
go
have
ahead.
Just a few comments. I appreciate your presentation, and in the research that I started doing, and was really studying where SBOE is at with the TEACs, and I did find in 2019 they had changed the word evaluate, and they changed it to compare and contrasting theories. And so I was looking through the 200 plus page document that was provided to us, and I couldn't find anywhere in there, and that's why I was asking what your intent was, because if we are currently going with the SBOE recommendations to compare and contrast Big Bang Theory and other theories of where we began, the origin of life, I believe. And so I wanted to get clarification if we're using that, the evaluate and contrast, or compare and contrast, if we're given that. I don't know if anybody has any of that information.
Dr. Hines, if you, or Ms. Carlisle, or Cheryl. Oh, Cheryl's over there. Hi, Cheryl. You're hiding.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
There was a time when we took the 2014 TEACs and they were streamlined, and in that process they removed and simplified the verbiage from analyze and evaluate to the compare and contrast. And so we of course do follow the guidance, and that was the shift, and that's when it happened. And so we of course follow the guidance exactly as it's stated in the TEACs, the current TEACs.
Okay, so in those specific, thank you for that. So in those specific instances that Dr. Harris is referencing, when there are those 3 specific TEACs where they're mentioning the Big Bang Theory, they are comparing and contrasting other theories in there, like creationism and.
Where there is information that is scientifically sound, then those different options are presented.
Is creationism scientifically sound?
I don't think it's for her to answer.
Well, I'm just asking the contents of the chapters that are referenced.
It would not be included in the textbooks that have been approved by the State Board of Education.
Okay.
Those textbooks do not include information.
So what are they comparing and contrasting then with the Big Bang Theory?
Big Bang Theory, there are multiple, I don't have a book in front of me, but there are multiple different viewpoints on it. And that's why they're not like fact, at least.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Go ahead.
Yeah, and
yes,
just,
please.
I'm thank you. I'm good.
Okay.
But just in just kind of wrapping that up, I from what I understand, we as board members can write content, and so that's sort of where I'm kind of at an impasse, because that's where I'm in an impasse. I do have just a quick paragraph that I copied from an article that came out. Instead of evaluating scientific theories, Texas students must now compare and contrast theories regarding cellular complexity. Rather than evaluating scientific explanations for the origin of DNA, students must now examine them. Scientific explanations include theories and hypotheses. Cargill, SBOE member and also on the science committee, said, adding in the 2009 requirement that students examine all sides of scientific arguments was found confusing and dropped from the TEAC standards. The new compromise language addresses both the need to streamline content while encouraging critical thinking by students. SBO Chair Donna Ballerich said in a statement cited by TEA, the streamlined standards will go into effect for the 2018-19 school year. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments
Nope.
or discussion? Okay. The parties have completed their presentations and discussion is concluded. The board will now make its decision regarding whether the portions of the 2015 Texas biology textbook and the 2014 aquatic science textbook objected to by Dr. Harris meet the selection criteria set out in board policy EFA. The board can uphold the decisions of the reconsideration committee, order any relief the board believes is appropriate, or ultimately take no action which would uphold the decision of both reconsideration committees. Is there a motion?
Mr. President, I motion that we uphold the level 2 recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion to uphold. Is there a
Second the motion.
We have a second?
And that's considered take no action, correct?
No.
No, it's
Uphold.
a,
It's to
Take action.
uphold.
Yeah.
100%.
yeah,
sorry.
it's an affirmative action.
Okay.
So we have a first and a second. The motion is to uphold the reconsideration committee's decision. Any conversation or discussion on that? All right,
Listen,
this time.
I do believe that atheism is a religion, so want to get that out there.
Okay. All right, at this time, we'll take a vote. All those in favor of the motion as presented? Okay. And those opposed? Okay. All right, the board has voted 3-1 to uphold the reconsideration committee's decision. Dr. Harris, you will receive written notice confirming the board's action. The district thanks both parties for their attendance at the hearing and for their presentations. The hearing has concluded. I will now turn the meeting back over to President Hubert for the board's next item on the agenda.
All right, very good.